Testing, testing. Okay, good. Hello, Internet. My name is Cowell. I have a GM's Guide, and this is that GM's Guide, but instead of regular, it's completely different. Today, I'm going completely off script, so you're going to hear me stuttering and stammering even more than normal. But what we're going to do is we're going to compare two different dungeons. The first one here is, which one is this? Fort Riston from Ironfang Invasion, a recent-ish Pathfinder Adventure Path dungeon. And the other one is going to be the spider section of this dungeon, which is for Petals and Thorns, a game that I designed. I don't want to imply, incidentally, since I am going to be comparing my dungeon favorably to Paizo's, so I don't want to imply that mine is perfect and flawless. We aren't going to be talking about dungeons overall. So long as we're doing the humility dance, I will point out that my dungeon has a really linear design. There are loops, but they barely mean anything, like this one down here. And for the most part, at the beginning here, you choose to either go down this corridor to the south or up this corridor to the north. And that is pretty much the last really important decision you make for most of it, with the exception of this part right here, which I can't take credit for because this whole section of map with tons of interesting loops and stuff, that was all given to me, in one big block by Gabriel Picard, who is the guy who does the map art for this. So a good dungeon should have a lot more loops and a lot more branching paths than this one, whereas most of the branching paths in this one quickly come to a dead end, which is basically a false option. But we aren't talking about layout right now. We are talking about combat encounters, and specifically how you should build an encounter to be interesting. So as you can see, my players have already completed this one. I believe actually the video of them completing this will go up right alongside this video itself. But what you can see here is that everything is still mostly in its original layout. A handful of NPCs did move positions. The red caps over here did all cluster on the third floor because the ones on the ground floor got spooked and they all hold up together on the top floor until they got slaughtered. And likewise, my players, after killing this Ohan Kanu, they lured all these Atomis out. So some of them are a little bit out of position, but for the most part, everything is still where it was originally. And what you can see immediately is that many of these encounters have exactly one unit type, and you rarely see a unit type repeated. That variety seems like a good thing, and it's better than nothing. You wouldn't want to have, every single encounter and this be the same thing, but it's not building to anything. Like you have an encounter with a bunch of Koreds early on. Now, you wouldn't want the next encounter to just be a whole bunch more Koreds. That would be really boring. That would be even worse than what we have here. But we never see any Koreds again. Except for specific named characters like Bristlebilly here, or Hauk, however you pronounce that guy's name, Grundlechar. But they have completely different stat blocks. You never see a Kored with something else, something that makes the encounter more interesting. You never see one of these melee units like these red caps who mostly just hit you with their scythes. You never see them alongside a ranged unit who uses them as meat shields and blasts from afar or anything like that. Instead, you just see a completely different set of unit types. There is, a red cap section, and then there's a Kored section. There's a pair of satyrs in here. You got some weird stuff like this taxidermy grizzly bear. There's tons of unit variety, but it's hardly ever used for anything. Everything is encountered by itself. And in fairness, my players did run extremely overpowered builds through this, which means even the characters who did have, perfectly interesting tactical setups didn't really get a chance to use them. Like Hauk Grundlechar here, for example, is actually a pretty well-designed encounter. He is himself a Skald. He has a bunch of buffs to pass out to his Spriggan bodyguards here, but it hardly made a difference because he died in like 2 rounds, because even with only 2 of them, my characters are crazy OP. They wanted to play Gestalt characters with mythic ranks, and I said okay, And, they're absolutely flattening everything, but they're having a good time, so whatever. Even if a regular, and, Paizo cannot be held responsible for how terribly overpowered the characters that my players decide they want to play are. But even in a regular campaign, these encounters would be harder, but they wouldn't be a whole lot more interesting. With, again, a couple of exceptions. Bristle Billy would have at least had some interesting abilities to go through, although, again, he's all by himself. And the Spriggan and Hulk team up there would actually have, there would have been two different builds in there. They would have had, they have an interesting interaction with each other with a buffer and some meat shields in front who also deal out some damage, that kind of thing. But for the most part, it's still just a single set of a specific, it's just a big set of a single specific kind of guy, and then that guy never gets used again in another more complicated, more interesting encounter. So now, let's look at Petals and Thorns, the Spider Cavern. By the way, when we zoom in here, there are going to be pictures of actual spiders in these tokens, so arachnophobes beware. So the spiders tend to nest in specific areas here, but that's not the last you'll see of them. Like this encounter here, you mostly see a bunch of wolf spiders, right? Past here, you get a bunch of trapdoor spiders and some funnel weavers, which are very similar. Trapdoor spiders are basically just weaker versions of things like funnel weavers and wolf spiders. Then deeper in, you get these recluses, you get spitting spiders, tiger spiders, and these all work differently. Like a spitting spider has a web attack. It's actually one of my spiders that has a web attack. A tiger spider does not have any range attacks like that, but what it does have is it will hit you really hard for a lot of poison damage. Its poison is much more potent than that of the wolf spider. These jumping spiders, what they can do is they can pounce on someone, which is they move 20 feet and land on them, and if their attack hits and does at least 1 point of damage, then they will grapple them automatically and just sink their fangs in, and then they get to deal their poison damage automatically every turn thereafter. They don't have to make another attack roll until they get ungrappled, until they get shaken off. And even basic tiger spiders, wolf spiders, funnel weavers especially, what they can do is they can crawl along the ceiling, and they will take reaction attacks from people whose threatened spaces they move along, just like normal. But then they can drop along behind someone, and just about all of these spiders have some kind of mobility theme to them. That's sort of the theme of this dungeon, right? Jumping spiders can jump past the front line to hit people in the back line. Funnel weavers and wolf spiders and tiger spiders, they can crawl past the front line, although those do take reaction attacks for it. These tarantulas are big, meaty tanks. So their main thing is that they will usually come in. They're slower than other ones too, so they'll usually come in to fill in the gaps after the swarms in front have had their go. And where this all comes to a head is, let me go ahead and bring it to the front. Another flaw on this map. I thought I was being so clever, having so much verticality in this map, but it makes it hard to run because you have to constantly keep track of which level of the map you need to bring to front. But where this all comes to a head is the nest chamber. All the spiders, they nest in different areas, but for themselves, they keep their food and they hang out there. But when they lay eggs, they come to the huntsman nest because that is the best defended part of the nest, and they all lay eggs here together, which means you have every type of spider here. Now, there are ways to neutralize some of the spider abilities. In particular, if you get them into a choke point, like back here, then you can stop them from swarming around you, which is particularly helpful with the tiger spiders and the wolf spiders and the funnel weavers that are all over the place. But if players intentionally take that strategy, then that's fine. They're neutralizing enemy tactics with a specific tactic of their own, which is sort of the point. But if they don't, if they just charge out here and engage like normal, then each of these spiders that they've encountered earlier in the dungeon will now be working together. And it's actually one important thing is that it's set up so that no matter which way you go, whether over this way or through here, at some point you have to fight a big old swarm of funnel weavers, and there's enough of them that at least a few of them should be able to crawl past the player's front line in order to demonstrate how that swarming works. That way they aren't taken off guard by it when they reach here in the spider's lair. And so this is basically just how you do more interesting encounter design. You start, with a couple of basic units, and then you use those as your building blocks, and then you combine them. And this isn't the best way to do it, for sure. Again, this dungeon is by no means the greatest dungeon ever written. It's not going to make you weep tears at its majesty or cure your cancer or anything. But it does do this particular thing reasonably well. And it's something that I think there should be more of in dungeon design, and adventure design in general. Is using these individual units as building blocks, and then using lots of them together with different abilities that synergize with each other. That are come together to form an actual strategy, rather than simply having every group of enemies be, a pack of mostly identical. You have 6 orcs here, and then we have 6 goblins here, and then we have 6 kobolds there. And they never really amount to anything more than that. We can do better. So, anyways, I am Chamomile. I have forgotten how I sign these things off, but I suppose next time we'll probably be talking about stealth encounters, assuming I don't delete this out of shame.